a millennial with a mortgage they bought for the price of a used Honda is in your replies right now, explaining that Gen Z is entitled for not being able to afford a one-bedroom apartment that costs more per month than their entire college tuition did. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. Let's actually do the math on this one, because I'm tired of watching this fight happen with zero numbers attached. So here's the discourse. In case you've somehow missed it, millennials keep saying Gen Z is soft, dramatic, allergic to hard work, always on their phones, complaining about avocado toast instead of grinding. And Gen Z keeps saying, respectfully, you inherited a completely different planet than we did. And normally, I'd stay out of intergenerational beef because it's exhausting and everyone's already mad. But I actually looked at the numbers, and I need to tell you, as someone who is technically hovering right on the millennial-Gen Z border myself, an uncomfortable little cartoon man caught in the middle of a family group chat that's about to go nuclear, Gen Z is not exaggerating. It's actually worse than the discourse makes it sound. Let's start with housing, because that's the one everyone actually feels in their body every single month. Right now, about 67% of Gen Z adults say they struggle to afford their rent or mortgage payment. Millennials struggling with the same thing? 40%, Gen X, 54%, Boomers, 36%. Notice the pattern. It's not a flat line across generations, it's basically a staircase, and Gen Z is standing at the bottom of it, getting rained on. And homeownership specifically, only about 27% of Gen Z currently own a home, compared to over half of millennials and more than 70% of Gen X and Boomers. People love to say, well, millennials struggled too when they were your age, and sure, they did. 2008 was rough. Nobody's denying that. But millennials are now sitting at 55% homeownership and climbing, while Gen Z is stuck near 27% facing a housing market that's had years longer to get worse on top of an already worse starting point. It's not the same struggle happening twice. It's the same struggle, except somebody moved the finish line back another mile before you even started running. And this is where I need you to sit with an actual number, because it's the kind of thing that sounds made up but isn't. The average wage for someone aged 20 to 24 right now is around $41,000 a year. The average wage for someone 45 to 54 is around $7,500. That's not, well, they have more experience. Obviously, they have more experience. That's not the point. The point is that gap, adjusted for what things actually cost today, is significantly wider than it was when millennials were in that same 20 to 24 window. You're not just earning less relative to your older coworkers. You're earning less relative to what a 22-year-old used to earn relative to a 50-year-old. The whole ladder shifted, and somehow you're the one getting told you're not climbing it hard enough. Here's the part of the discourse that genuinely makes my eye twitch. And I need you to imagine me saying this while aggressively stirring a lukewarm iced coffee. Millennials love to point out that Gen Z gives up too easily, or job hops too much, or doesn't want to pay dues. Except when millennials were entering the workforce, the overall economy they walked into, yes, even accounting for the 2008 crash, still had things like actual entry-level pipelines, lower housing costs relative to wages, and a job market that, once it recovered into something resembling normal hiring patterns. Gen Z entered a labor market where entry-level postings are drying up, where AI and automation are quietly swallowing the exact tasks that used to be someone's first job, and where a huge share of Gen Z and millennials alike now describe survival spending, meaning spending on necessities with basically nothing left over, as their actual day-to-day normal, not some rough patch, the actual baseline. Over 70% of Gen Z and millennials combined report exactly that. Only 32% of that same group still believes the whole work hard, buy a house, retire eventually script is even achievable anymore. And I want to be fair here, because I promised myself this wouldn't just be a one-sided pile-on. And also because the actual data doesn't let you do a clean millennials had it easy narrative either. It's more specific and more interesting than that. New Federal Reserve research found the millennial generation has basically split in two. Millennials over 35 are starting to edge toward boomer-style wealth, buying homes, building equity, catching up. Everyone younger than that, including the tail end of millennials and all of Gen Z, is falling further behind. So it's not really millennials versus Gen Z as two clean opposing teams. It's more like people who got in before the door slammed versus everyone who showed up after. And that dividing line happens to cut right through the middle of the millennial generation itself, which means some of the loudest back-in-my-day millennials online are actually one bad. Fed report, away from being in the same boat they're currently mocking Gen Z for being stuck in. Not financial advice moment, obligatory. Delivered while I stared directly into the camera with the energy of a man who has personally done this exact math on his own paycheck at 1 a.m. None of this means either generation is lazy, and it definitely doesn't mean this is some kind of even fight where both sides just need to communicate better. One generation got a housing market, a wage-to-cost ratio, and an entry-level job pipeline that, while genuinely hard at points, eventually normalized. The other generation got asked to build a life on top of a housing deficit in the millions, entry-level wages that haven't kept pace, and a job market where the first rung of the ladder is being quietly sawed off by a chatbot. That's not a vibes difference. That's a structural one, and you can measure it in percentage points. Here's the counterintuitive part. Nobody on either side of this fight really wants to say out loud, because it ruins the fun of being mad online. This isn't actually a generational personality problem at all. It's not that millennials are out of touch as people, and it's not that Gen Z is too sensitive as people. Both generations are reacting completely rationally to two very different economic environments, and then mistaking each other's rational reactions for character flaws. A millennial who bought a house in 2015 isn't necessarily smarter or harder working than a Gen Z renter in 2026. They mostly just had a different entry price. And a Gen Z worker who job hops every 14 months, refuses unpaid overtime, and treats a job posting, asking for 3 to 5 years experience for an entry-level role with the contempt it deserves isn't entitled. They're pattern matching correctly to a labor market that has repeatedly shown them loyalty doesn't pay the way it used to. Two rational responses, same discourse framed as a character war instead of what it actually is, which is two generations reading two different economies correctly and then blaming each other for the readings. There is one genuinely hopeful wrinkle in all this, and I'd be lying to you if I left it out just because it's inconvenient for the everything is doom version of this video. There's an estimated $84 trillion projected to pass down through inheritance from older generations to Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z over the next couple decades. And even with all the current squeeze, a real chunk of Gen Z is positioned to eventually benefit from that transfer. That's not just wait it out and you'll be fine, because plenty of people won't see a dollar of it and inheritance-based. Hope is a genuinely bad long-term financial plan for any individual person, but it does mean the story isn't a flat, permanent doom line either. It's more like rough entry, real structural disadvantage right now, with a long, unevenly distributed runway underneath it that nobody should assume applies to them, personally. So look, if you're a Gen Z person who's tired of getting told to just get a better job by someone whose entry-level job in 1998 cost less per month than your current phone bill, you're not imagining the gap. It's measurable, it's in the Fed data, it's in the housing numbers, it's in the wage gap between 22 and 52-year-olds, it's real. And if you're a millennial who genuinely did struggle in A8 and feels like your own hard years are getting erased in this conversation, also fair, also real, that struggle happened too. It's just a different struggle with a different shape, and statistically, a better long-term outcome for most of that generation as a whole. Nobody here needs to lose so the other person can win. You're both standing in the wreckage of the same broken pipeline. You're just standing at different points along it, yelling at each other instead of at the actual thing that broke it. Anyway, not financial advice. I'm a cartoon guy who still hasn't figured out his own 401k contribution percentage. Please don't fight in my replies, or actually fight a little. Engagement is engagement. I have bills too. If you want more of this, the actual numbers behind the discourse, minus the back in my day nonsense from either side, subscribe, so future me can keep translating group chat arguments into something you can actually use. Okay. Back to refreshing my own rent portal, hoping it magically goes down. See you in the next one.